And like most shrewd businessmen, the oil baron Koch brothers are very good at protecting and growing their prodigious future and their prodigious fortune. There's nothing un-American about that. But what is un-American is when shadowy billionaires pour unlimited money into our democracy to rig the system to benefit themselves and the wealthiest 1%.
Senator Harry Reid is certainly not the only Democratic member of Congress to verbally assail the Koch brothers, exactly what his topic was there. Certainly the one who deems it necessary to use the vital time on the floor to launch an attack when supposedly there's nothing more important to discuss. But when you look at his comments and take into account the entire picture, Senator Reid is perhaps just the leader among those who are missing the point. For the Koch brothers, as wealthy as they may be and as much money as they do donate to specific causes, are certainly far from the only members of the wealthy glitterati seeking to purchase political favors. A new book digs into the details, where of course the devil always is. Big money, $2.5 billion, one suspicious vehicle, and a pimp on the trail of American politics. It does exactly what any good investigator is always told: follow the money. We welcome the author, also the chief investigative reporter for Politico to Midpoint. Ken Vogel joins us today. Ken, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, it's great to be with you.
I love the title. The title itself will probably sell a whole lot of books right from there. Let's start right up front what Harry Reid says. And that's the thing that caught me as soon as I saw him, and we continue to see these assails on the Koch brothers. It makes no difference whether you love them or hate them. Let's take that out of the mix at the moment. They're not the only guys shoveling tons of cash to buy political favors, or am I being naive?
No, you're absolutely right. And this is a growing area of political involvement, and we're seeing it increasingly on both sides. It is certainly true that initially, after these Supreme Court and lower court decisions that opened up the campaign finance system and allowed the wealthy to spend unlimited sums, and I should add, it's not just wealthy donors, it's corporations, it's labor unions, a group that Democrats like to ignore when they talk about this. However, the right was, and conservatives were, quicker to rush into this game than liberals were. We're increasingly seeing that changing as the 2014 midterms approach, and I think we'll see it even more as the 2016 presidential election approaches. And we see these huge donors, very wealthy liberals, getting in behind Hillary Clinton. However, as we saw in 2012 with the Republican presidential primary, it only takes one very wealthy donor with another idea about who should represent the party and the direction that the party should go to throw all those plans into chaos and really make for a very long, very expensive, and potentially very nasty primary to determine who succeeds President Barack Obama.
Ken, let's set a number here, first of all, because we know about the Koch brothers and George Soros, but those are the two right away that immediately America looks at and says, okay, we know these names. In your investigation and writing the book, how many actual individuals did you find who, with one check, can completely alter the landscape of a political election?
Well, there are certainly many more that have that ability than that actually participate in this sort of big money spending. And that's one of the really interesting things that I found, is that in this new system, because it is so, because it empowers so much these very wealthy folks, there is an increasing impetus on the operatives and the politicians on both sides to really court these folks who have that ability. So while there are maybe a couple dozen total that's spread over both sides of the spectrum, Republican and Democrat, who actually do engage in this type of big giving, there are many more who could. And what we see and what I write about in the book is, for instance, an effort by Democrats up to and including Barack Obama to court these wealthy Democrats who do not give as much money into the process, but could. Bill Gates is a name that came up repeatedly as I reported this book. And I have an anecdote in the book where President Obama, during his re-election campaign in 2012, is at this private fundraiser with these wealthy Democrats, including Bill Gates, including Steve Ballmer, the CEO of Microsoft, former CEO, who just spent $2 billion to buy the LA Clippers. And Obama is telling them, hey, you're now at the point where you have 200 donors who could decide who is elected president each and every time. Obama says that's not the way it's supposed to work, but then he goes on to put even a finer point on it, to nervous laughter in the room. Folks are kind of like uneasy with where Obama is going. He says, in fact, There are 5 or 6 people in this room tonight who could simply write a check and determine at least who gets the nomination in 2016. He's talking about Democrats, mind you, if not determine who's elected president. Then he goes even further, stepping towards Bill Gates, who's kind of standing anxiously with his hands in his pockets, looking at his feet, and says, Bill, you could write a check and just swamp whatever anyone else decides to do. And that's true. And Bill Gates has not written that check yet. There's no reason he couldn't, especially when you look at Steve Ballmer, who's standing right there next to him, who just spent $2 billion to buy the LA Clippers. Well, he could very easily spend $2 billion and determine who the Democratic nominee is in 2016.
Then if we're going to be completely fair in this, we do have to say that Harry Reid and others like him, and again, not an attack, but they are just as guilty of having a selective memory as anybody else, because as you pointed out in the book, and certainly political aspirants know, it was that shellacking in 2010 in the midterms, and all of a sudden the Democrats, who had kind of had the closed wallet, said, wait a minute, let's open up and let's start spending some money. So it's very selective in their memory as to who spends, correct?
And Harry Reid, you said he's just as guilty as most. He may be more guilty than most, because he, in fact, has been very aggressive and very assiduous in courting these super PAC donors for a super PAC that is run by his aides to support Democratic candidates for Senate. It's called the Senate Majority PAC. Harry Reid's name, his fingerprints are all over it. Some of the Democrats like to say, the Democratic big donors, that there's an irony in what they do, that they're giving all this money to support candidates who then rail against big money in politics. I've heard an even finer point put on it. It's not irony, it's hypocrisy. And you could certainly make that argument when it comes to Harry Reid.
All right, so here's what people are going to wonder now. We hear about the Koch brothers every single day. I mentioned this yesterday. If you go to Google and you Google Koch brothers, your computer explodes in milliseconds here with all the different comments that are out there about it. Why is it, and I'm going to ask you here to kind of take this out of the media, because a lot of people will say, wait a minute, the first thing is it's the media's fault. Why is it the Koch brothers the only ones we hear about?
Well, it is certainly a Democratic effort, a concerted Democratic effort to shine the spotlight on them, to make them bogeymen, to make it an election issue that is big money in politics. I was just on the phone with Ben Cohen. He's the founder of Ben & Jerry's. He's made a real effort to get money out of politics, and he spent a lot of money trying to push this constitutional amendment. He hates it when Harry Reid gets up there on the floor and talks about the Koch brothers, because he thinks that takes what is for him a sort of ideological crusade, that is to get money out of politics, and makes it a political crusade, that is to shine the spotlight on specific Republican donors and not acknowledge that this is a bipartisan issue, that both sides are participating in this new big money politics. Well, why do Democrats shine the spotlight on the Kochs if, in fact, their true goal, as they put it at least, is to get money out of politics? Because they know it riles up their donors, both their small donors who are going to go to their computer and give a contribution, and their big donors, the folks who they are relying on to offset the Koch spending. They know that talking about the Koch brothers is going to get them closer to their checkbook, to adding another zero to the big check that they're going to give to the exact same types of groups that the Koch brothers fund, except on the other side.
All right, so let's kind of put it in perspective here. The amount of money that the Kochs do know, and we do know that they give to certain political campaigns and certain political interests. In your investigative knowledge here, and from what you cover, what is the percentage you think of Democratic money that comes up to the Kochs? Can we say that Democrats, although it may not be just the Koch brothers, it may be a couple of people who are coming up to 80%, 90%, 100% of the same level of money that the Kochs are putting in?
No, I think that the Kochs are, in fact, there is a reason. So I say it's a politically motivated focus on the Kochs, and it is. However, they are, in fact, spending more and raising more. And it's not just the Koch brothers. That sort of oversimplifies things. The Koch brothers are so impactful in politics because they have all these other donors who they've sort of created this network out of, who they bring together twice a year for these seminars where they raise money. These are other wealthy folks who believe, as they do, that big government is infringing upon a free society and crimping business and sort of hindering prosperity in America. Well, they were able, through the Koch brothers and their full donor network, to raise around $400 million during the 2012 elections. We didn't see any Democrats really approach that. the Democracy Alliance, this group that George
But they could.
Soros.
But they could if they wanted to. They could.
Oh,
The money's there.
absolutely, they could. And in fact, they are catching up. That's where I was going with that. In 2012, 2010, Republicans and the Koch brothers in particular, who like to think of themselves as conservatives and even libertarians less than Republicans, they really pioneered this new post-Citizens United spending. Democrats are quickly cutting into their advantage. In 2014, actually, Democrats are ahead in super PAC spending. That doesn't take into account all this 501c4 nonprofit.
Okay, well, I'm going to go
spending.
ahead and have to leave it there. Unfortunately, we're out of time. But Ken, trust me, we're going to visit this again. Ken Vogel, thanks so much for your time.
Hey, it was my pleasure.
Hey, here goes something, too, as we head on out. There was a Forbes article from a couple of years ago in the headline, "For billionaires, politics is the cheapest asset around." That may be the best way to put it. Midpoint returns